Thank you, Professor Hafner. You and for your plea that we have the right to air. We will actually have the right to air, but not to take more time than we have. So I welcome now Dr. Wendy Smith from Down Under. She is currently the director of the Center for Malaysian Studies at the Monash Asia Institute and also a senior lecturer at the Department of Management at Monash University. Additionally, she teaches regularly at the University of Hildesheim in Germany. I'm happy that she presents insights on the contribution of the Gülen movement to social protection in Turkish communities in Germany and Australia, findings that were prepared by her researcher Tuba Boas and herself.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be able to address you today, and I would like to thank the organizers, especially Professor Karakoyon, who invited me. And also I bring greetings from my co-author Tuba Boz, who is a young Turkish-Australian researcher who has just submitted her PhD to Monash University. She's second generation, and I think she and her family embody the experience of Turkish Australians. Her father is a social worker. Her elder sister is the deputy principal of Ishik College in Melbourne, a Gülen college, and her second sister works in a halal butcher store, which is a very, very important business in Melbourne. Also, I would like to say that I think academic circles are craving for spirituality, and I can give you proof of this because I'm an anthropologist working in a management department, and you would not normally imagine that spirituality would be a topic that management academics think about. But in fact, the most prestigious Academy of Management, the American Association, has established now for some years a chapter called Management, Religion and Spirituality, and they have a journal. And I'm also supervising 3 PhDs in areas related to spirituality. One is studying servant leadership. A second one is studying spiritual preparation for disaster. And my third student is studying spirituality in modern corporations. So I think it's just wonderful that we have this conference where we're bringing together deep discussions of spirituality with academic analysis. The next overhead, please. So why study social protection among Turkish communities in Germany and Australia? Well, as Professor Derricks mentioned yesterday, there are many similarities and yet differences between the situation of Turkish settlers in Australia and Germany. In both countries, workers came from the 1960s to rescue the manufacturing sectors of the economies with their dedicated labour and hard work. But in both economies, the manufacturing sector is now in decline, and this means that many of those workers or their children who came to fit into that sector of the labour market are now facing potential or actual unemployment unless they have managed to get into the process of social mobility through education. And as Professor Derricks explained, this is much easier to do in Australia than in Germany due to the nature of the education system and the policy of multiculturalism in Australia. Thirdly, theories of social protection, and I will define this in a minute, have not very much included a focus on the role of traditional institutions and religious institutions to provide social safety nets for members of society. And definitely they have not discussed yet in any depth the mechanisms of social protection in migrant communities. Thank you. So our project then is a combination of researchers in Hildesheim University, led by Professor Derricks, and myself in Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, to look at this question. And we are using qualitative method, doing in-depth interviews with community leaders and policymakers. And we're hoping to extend that to talking to the members of the community, which is what I like to do as an anthropologist. And our basic question that we started off with is, to what extent do Turkish Muslim migrants in Germany and Australia rely on traditional community and religious social protection mechanisms, either together with or as an alternative to social protection institutions which are provided by the state? And sometimes we can think about this in terms of just how difficult it is to fill out those unemployment forms. I've had some experiences of filling out forms in Germany. For instance, for my superannuation, I was asked if I had ever worked on a barge on the Rhine, and that was a delightful question to have to answer. So I think the process of filling out forms is very daunting, not just to people who are newly arrived in a culture, but even those who have lived there for a long time. And definitely this social security office in Australia, one associates with surveillance, and people are a little bit scared to fill out the forms. It is quite difficult. So it may be that people would rather depend on their traditional community and family support mechanisms than go through this daunting process. This was what we were also interested in examining. So what is social protection then? And I've found a definition which fits the norms in the Asian Development Bank, and it's defined as policies and programs designed to reduce poverty and vulnerability by promoting efficient labour markets, diminishing people's exposure to risks, enhancing their capacity to protect themselves against hazards, and interruption or loss of income. You can see that this is a very economic definition of the situation, mainly focusing on poverty relief or avoidance, and it is discussing the issue at the level of what the nation state provides. Thank you. So within the institutions of social protection within the state, there are 5 main areas, and I won't go into these in detail, but you can see there it would naturally relate to providing opportunities for employment, helping people when they become unemployed, looking after people who have special vulnerability, and so on. But the wider view of social protection, which is what I'm more interested in today, is to expand to a view of traditional institutions as providers of social protection. So the family, our kinship networks, the wider community or neighbourhood, also our friends, and religious institutions. And this is where the focus on Islam comes in. So we should not limit the boundaries of social protection institutions to the nation state, and especially it is good to focus on the situation of migration. What happens in the context of a diaspora? And it's been mentioned that people send remittances. In the case of the Turkish communities overseas, you have support also from the Turkish government. But when we ask people in our interviews, what do you understand by the meaning of social protection? Many people said it relates to a feeling of being safe and welcome in the host society. So I would also like to extend the definition to a society giving people the freedom to practice their religion, to practice their cultural activities, and the freedom to speak their own language, as well as having access to employment, education and healthcare in culturally acceptable forms. So this would mean things like Muslim women being able to wear the headscarf on the job. And in Australia, the police force has a headscarf as part of their uniform in the dark blue cloth of the police uniform. Similarly, banks have the same thing. In our health system, we have the possibility for you to have an interpreter in your native language in the hospital, and there are about 50 or more languages, interpreters on call. So multiculturalism then is the key difference, I think, for the situation of Turkish residents in Australia and Germany. And Australia embraces, through its policy of multiculturalism, it embraces ethnic diversity. It gives funding for ethnic groups to conduct their cultural activities. As Professor Derricks mentioned, religious schools are funded, private schools are funded. It has traditionally been Christian schools, but of course this has now extended to Muslim schools and any other Rudolf Steiner schools, any other schools that can demonstrate they maintain the standards of the curriculum. Thank you. So we can also see then to look at social protection in two ways. One would be mechanisms which prevent the need for help, so that they set up people in society to be self-sufficient and economically and socially viable. So here the support of community and religious values and education systems would have a lot of meaning in our topic of social protection. And then of course there are the cure mechanisms. When things go wrong, what help can you rely upon? And at this level, the state mechanisms of unemployment benefits and so on come into play. So a sense of feeling safe for an individual in society would be a combination of both these. Now, I've got 3 PowerPoints here, but we'll jump over those. I've just given the theoretical basis of the academic analysis of social protection, and gradually over the years it is coming to include more focus on the traditional cultural values. So may we now go to social protection in Islam. And as you will know perhaps better than I do, Islam already has from its outset very, very profound mechanisms of social protection through the institution of zakat and other charitable practices. And these were intimately bound up with the nature and the maintenance of the ummah, the spiritual community of believers. In fact, a paper on charity in Islam by Koexistenz describes how the practice of charity helps to define and reinforce solidarity in the Muslim community. And the centrality of zakat as one of the 5 pillars of Islam, I think, is extremely significant and gave me confidence to give this focus on social protection in Islam. Thank you. Oh, actually, I had a few more PowerPoints, if I might. I was saying thank you to the gentleman here because I want to just bring it all together and to tie up with the contribution of Gülen. The last one, please. Yes, thank you. We have discussed the importance of Islam, of education in the Gülen movement, and this would be one of the preventative mechanisms of social protection. I think that's very, very clear in the way Gülen schools are organised. The very significant thing for me, though, is that they are open to non-Muslims. And whereas traditionally we would think of zakat and sadaqah as being mainly for Muslims in the first instance, at the outset the Gülen movement is focusing on a wider community. The media provisions for fair and informative media have also been discussed, and I was very indebted to a paper by Dr. Orhan from the Washington Conference last year, where he discussed the concepts of hizmet and himmet as emphasized within Gülen's teachings. So, in conclusion, I would like to draw this all together and say that basically, with its emphasis on education and values and service, the prevention form of social protection, and the true application of Islamic values without limiting them to the Muslim community is the contribution of the Gülen movement and Gülen's thinking to bridge the gap between tradition and modernity for Turkish people living in modern secular society, especially overseas, and making these values available within the context of a modern secular state. So again, it makes possible people to live a spiritual existence. I think this is Islam's greatest strength, that within a modern secular state you can live a very spiritual life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy Smith, and also thank you for sticking to our time limit. The last 15 minutes go to Dr. Gürkan Çelik. He was born in Turkey and studied in Ankara at the University of Tilburg. He received his PhD in 2008, actually on the Gülen movement. He is one of the co-founders of the Cosmicus College in Rotterdam, which we heard a little bit yesterday already, and he is also involved in the periodical De Cascade. Thank you very much for talking about Islamic ethic and the middle road.